My name is Emily Carter, and until last summer my life was simple, ordinary, and safe. I worked at a small bookstore, I loved long evening walks, and I believed that the world would always stay steady under my feet. I never imagined how quickly everything could change, or how a single moment could rewrite the future I thought I had. The accident happened on a warm afternoon. I was driving home after visiting a friend, thinking about nothing important, just the music on the radio and the sunlight on the road. Then, out of nowhere, a truck ran the red light. There was a loud crash, a burst of glass, and then darkness that felt endless. When I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital bed with bright lights above me and machines beeping beside me like cold reminders that I was still alive. The doctors tried to be gentle when they spoke, but their words still shattered me. Welcome to my channel. If you're watching this on Facebook, don't forget to follow the page. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you enjoyed the story, let me know in the comments below. You can also share your thoughts from the heart in the comments, so I can create more stories based on what you love. Thank you for your support. They told me my spine was badly injured. They told me the damage was severe. And then they said there was a high chance I would never walk again. The room didn't spin. It didn't explode. It simply went quiet, as if the world had stepped back and left me alone with the truth. The days that followed felt heavy and unreal. Nurses came and went. My mother held my hand and tried to hide the fear in her eyes. Friends visited with flowers and soft voices, but when they left, the silence returned and wrapped itself around me. I kept hearing the same sentence in my head, "You may never walk again." The physical pain was sharp, but the emotional pain was deeper. I felt trapped inside a body that no longer responded to me. At night, I stared at my motionless legs and wondered if they still belonged to me. Doubt crept in, whispering that my life was already over even though I was still breathing. I cried quietly so no one would hear, because I didn't want to be another burden on the people who loved me. One evening, I overheard two nurses talking outside my door. They said I was young, but injuries like mine were hard to recover from, and many people never walked again. Their words hurt, but they also lit a small fire inside me. A stubborn part of me refused to accept that this was the final chapter of my life. That night, lying alone in the dim hospital room, I made myself a promise. I didn't know how long it would take or how painful the road would be, but I decided that I would not give up. Even if the world believed I would never walk again, I would still fight for every inch of hope I had left. And from that moment forward, my story stopped being about what I had lost and started becoming about how hard I was willing to try to stand again. The next morning, I woke up to the soft hum of machines and the muted sunlight spilling across the hospital room. My legs still felt like strangers, unresponsive and heavy, but for the first time in days, I didn't feel paralyzed by fear. I could hear the nurses moving down the hallway, their steps light, but every sound now felt like a reminder that life was still moving outside these walls, and I needed to move with it too. I asked the nurse to help me sit on the edge of the bed. My heart raced as I swung my legs over the side, feeling the cold floor against my bare feet. For a moment, I just stayed there, clinging to the edge as if it could anchor me to reality. The nurse encouraged me gently, reminding me to breathe, and I did. I closed my eyes and pictured myself walking again, step by step, even if it took months or years. The thought was frightening, but it also sparked a determination I hadn't realized I possessed. Over the next few days, therapy began. Small exercises at first, moving my toes, flexing my knees, lifting my legs slightly while lying down. Each motion felt like a battle, but every time I succeeded, even just a little, I felt a surge of hope. My hands trembled as I held the parallel bars for support, and I fell more times than I could count, but each time, I remembered the promise I had whispered to myself the night I decided not to give up. Family visits became my anchor. My mother brought old photographs, letters from friends, and stories from my childhood. She reminded me of my first bike ride, my school plays, and the day I had caught a stray kitten in the rain. These stories grounded me, showing me that I had overcome challenges before, and I could overcome this too. Her eyes never left me, and her quiet confidence whispered that she believed I could walk again, even when I didn't believe it myself. Friends who visited brought laughter and normalcy. They spoke of the world beyond the hospital, the park where we used to picnic, the bookstore events I loved, and even silly things like a bakery that made the best chocolate croissants. Each conversation was a thread, connecting me back to life outside these walls. Slowly, I began to feel like more than a patient. I began to feel like Emily again, the girl who had dreams, who had walked through parks and streets without thinking twice, and who would walk again. One afternoon, as the sun poured through the window, I made my first real attempt to stand. Holding onto the parallel bars, I pressed my legs down, trying to lift my body. Pain shot through every muscle, but I gritted my teeth and forced myself upward. A nurse steadied me, but I was doing the work. For a brief, shining moment, my feet touched the floor, carrying some of my weight. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't walking, but it was a start. And in that moment, I realized that progress doesn't come all at once. It comes inch by inch and step by step if you refuse to quit. After that first moment of standing, I felt a cautious spark of confidence. Every day became a challenge I couldn't ignore. Therapy sessions stretched longer, and the exercises grew harder, but I faced them with a stubborn determination. The pain was intense, muscles ached in ways I never imagined, but with each movement, I felt pieces of myself returning. I began to realize that healing wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional, and spiritual. I had to convince not only my body, but also my mind that walking again was possible. The days blended together, a rhythm of effort, exhaustion, and occasional victory. Simple tasks became milestones. Reaching for a cup of water, moving from bed to chair without support, even standing for a few seconds without a nurse holding me, these small moments became triumphs. I documented each step, no matter how minor, because I knew that over time, the accumulation of small victories would be the story of my comeback. I refused to let frustration steal the progress I had made. Family remained my greatest source of encouragement. My mother never left my side, often sitting quietly while I struggled through exercises. She reminded me gently of my strength, my resilience, and my past accomplishments. My father, who had always been quiet and stoic, finally spoke words that resonated deeper than anyone expected. "Emily," he said, "the world might try to limit you, but no one can define what you are capable of. You decide that." Those words echoed in my mind during the hardest exercises, giving me courage when my own resolve faltered. Friends, too, played a role I hadn't anticipated. They would sit for hours, sharing stories, jokes, and memories, sometimes distracting me from the pain, sometimes cheering me through it. One evening, my best friend brought a small music player and set it beside my bed. She pressed play and soft melodies filled the room. I closed my eyes, letting the rhythm guide me as I tried to move my legs, imagining each note as a step toward freedom. Music became therapy itself, intertwining with my determination, creating a rhythm that reminded me I was alive and capable. By the end of the first month, I could bear some weight on my legs without support. I still relied on parallel bars, but every attempt added inches to my confidence. The hospital room no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a workshop where I rebuilt myself. Each day I woke, I reminded myself of the promise I had whispered to the universe: I will not give up. The memory of the accident remained, but it became fuel rather than a prison. One morning, as the sunlight spilled across the floor, I took a step. Not many, but a step, unsteady, wobbly, almost trembling. Yet it was mine. I repeated it, focusing on balance, on posture, on breathing. And then I took another. Each step carried the weight of determination, fear, hope, and courage. I realized in that moment that the journey was still long, but I had discovered something critical. The power to persist lay within me. Every setback, every ache, every tear had led to this fragile yet undeniable triumph. I was walking again, not fully, not yet freely, but walking toward a life I refused to surrender. Walking those first unsteady steps changed something inside me. Each movement reminded me that life was not over, that I still had control over my story. Therapy sessions became more intense, pushing my body in ways I hadn't imagined possible. But I no longer feared pain the way I once did. It had become proof of my effort, proof that I was trying, proof that I refused to quit. I began to notice the small victories more than the setbacks. Lifting my arms without trembling, standing longer without support, taking a few steps across the room, each accomplishment, however minor it seemed, was a declaration that I was still here, still fighting, still alive. I started setting goals for myself, tiny ones at first, 5 steps without bars, then 10, then walking from one side of the room to the other. Each goal was a promise I kept to myself, and keeping them rebuilt my confidence piece by piece. The hospital staff noticed the change in me. Therapists smiled more when I walked past. Nurses encouraged me with light words and gentle pats on the shoulder, and even doctors looked at my progress with quiet amazement. Their support was important, but the real change came from within. I had finally started believing that I could walk again, not someday in some distant future, but now, inch by inch, step by step. I also began imagining life beyond the hospital. I pictured myself walking in my favorite park, feeling the grass under my feet, carrying a basket of groceries, or even laughing with friends over coffee in a small cafe. These mental images became practice for my spirit. The more I pictured movement, the more my body seemed to respond. It was as if belief itself had started repairing the muscles and nerves that had betrayed me. My mother stayed by my side throughout. She often held my hand while I stood, whispering encouragement, reminding me of the courage I had shown in the past. "You've survived worse than anyone could imagine, Emily," she said one morning. "You're stronger than even you know." Her words echoed in my mind when my legs shook, when pain tried to convince me to stop, and when I feared I couldn't continue. They reminded me that I was not alone in this journey, and that love could give strength in ways nothing else could. By the 6th week, I could walk across the room holding only a single handrail. It wasn't perfect. I stumbled occasionally, and my legs ached like never before, but I could feel freedom creeping back into my body. I realized that strength wasn't about never falling. It was about rising each time, refusing to surrender, and moving forward even when every part of you screamed to stop. Each small success fueled the next, and the world outside the hospital no longer felt distant or unreachable. I was on my way to reclaiming my life. By the 7th week, walking had become a daily ritual, both physically exhausting and emotionally rewarding. Each step reminded me that I was no longer the person I had been the day the accident changed everything. The hospital room no longer felt like a cage. It had become a training ground for resilience, patience, and courage. Every ache, every tremor, every stumble was a reminder that progress required persistence and faith in oneself. I started setting new goals beyond the parallel bars. I wanted to walk down the hallway without support, then reach the therapy garden outside. Each day, I pushed a little further, trusting that my body, once fragile and betrayed, could learn strength again. I memorized the rhythm of my steps, counted each movement, and reminded myself to breathe deliberately. Progress didn't come instantly, but the accumulation of effort began to manifest in movement that felt more natural with each passing day. The world outside the hospital grew closer in my mind. I imagined opening the door to fresh air, feeling the wind against my face, hearing the birds in the trees, and smelling the rain on concrete. I imagined seeing familiar faces, walking unassisted into a cafe, greeting my friends with a smile, or even carrying groceries without relying on anyone's help. These images motivated me to endure the hardest moments of therapy, and each successful attempt at walking was a small victory, reinforcing the belief that freedom was still within my reach. My support system became my backbone. My mother continued to offer encouragement without pressure, reminding me of my resilience. Emily, she said one afternoon as I steadied myself against the handrail, "You've survived fear, pain, and doubt. You've carried yourself this far, and nothing can take that away from you." Her words carried a weight deeper than any physical therapy session. My father, friends, and even fellow patients contributed to a network of support that transformed the act of walking from a struggle into a shared triumph. Therapists increased the intensity of exercises, introducing stairs, balance boards, and longer walks. I stumbled many times, each fall teaching me patience and persistence. I learned to trust my body again, to listen to its signals, to coordinate muscle and mind in a way I had never considered before. Pain became a companion, not an enemy. Each ache reminded me of my effort, my determination, and my unwillingness to surrender. By the 8th week, I walked across the therapy garden alone, my steps uneven but confident. The wind brushed against my cheeks and sunlight warmed my skin. I felt a surge of accomplishment and relief unlike anything I had experienced before. I realized that walking wasn't just about moving my legs, it was about reclaiming agency over my life, refusing to let a single moment define my story. Every step I took reaffirmed the promise I had made to myself, and for the first time since the accident, I felt truly free. Walking through the therapy garden that morning felt different. The sun was brighter, the air warmer, and I felt a rhythm in my steps I had never thought possible. I realized that each fall, each ache, and every tear had led me to this moment. My body had learned to trust itself again, and my mind had grown resilient in ways I never imagined. I was not the same woman who had arrived in the hospital weeks ago. I was stronger, braver, and more determined than ever. Friends and family watched from the benches nearby, their faces lit with smiles and pride. I caught my mother's eye, and she gave me a gentle nod, her expression telling me that she always believed I could do this, even when I had doubted myself. The encouragement of everyone around me had been vital, but I knew the real triumph belonged to me. I had fought for every step, earned every inch of movement, and claimed my independence again. That day, I walked farther than I had ever dared before, leaving behind the handrails and relying solely on my own balance. Each step was deliberate, mindful, and filled with gratitude. The wind against my skin reminded me that life continued outside the walls that had once confined me. I felt connected to everything around me, the trees swaying in the garden, the distant laughter of children, and the soft hum of the city beyond the hospital. I was moving forward, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. The journey had been long, filled with uncertainty and pain, but it had also revealed an inner strength I didn't know I possessed. I learned that perseverance mattered more than perfection, that courage often emerged from fear, and that hope could sustain someone even through the darkest days. Each step I took carried a story of resilience, an affirmation that setbacks do not define the person who refuses to surrender. By the end of that day, I walked across the garden multiple times, each time more confident and graceful. I could see a future where I would continue rebuilding my life, returning to the things I loved, and embracing new opportunities. The accident had changed me, but it had not broken me. Instead, it had forged a version of myself stronger than I had ever imagined possible. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the garden, I paused for a moment to reflect. My legs were tired, my muscles ached, and my body was still healing, but my spirit soared. I had reclaimed control of my life, rewritten the story that fate had tried to limit, and discovered that resilience could carry someone farther than fear ever could. For the first time in months, I felt whole, empowered, and ready to step into the world with confidence. The journey was not over, but I had already won.